Sound check, 1, 2, 1, 2.
I can hear you, Caitlin.
YouTube streaming, sound check, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, friendly friends.
Good morning, Jeffrey. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
Good.
That was a good exchange of pleasantries.
Beautiful outside. Hope to enjoy
It
some of
is.
it today. Yeah, I think it was. It was appropriate. And at least we're not singing the red and blue song. You do a terrific job at that, by the way.
The red and
I
blue
could be
song?
green. I could be blue. I
Oh.
could be.
I will gather everyone for something like that soon.
We have to do another one of those.
It's been a while since we've had a sing along.
And we don't want to wait for a legendary singer to pass away before we do it again. We have to find something else.
It shouldn't require someone's passing to do that.
I'm not sure if Vice Chair Leeper, if you've received anything from Kelly yet. There's a small technical amendment of one word.
I saw that. Blah, blah, blah. Delete the word capital. I can do that. Wow. Oh, yeah, no, it makes total sense. Good morning, Diane. Good morning, Eli.
There we go.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Jeff, it doesn't feel like we left each other yet since
Yes.
last night.
Oh, a quick little break and then back to collaboration and discussion. What are we doing today? Transportation.
That's right. That's why Deanne looks so happy this morning.
Yay.
Not you guys again going through her head.
Good morning, Laura. Good morning, Sean.
Morning,
Hey,
everybody.
guys.
Are there any committee meetings tomorrow?
Good question.
Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee.
I enjoy those, but you know what? It's been a
That's
long
fine.
week of committee meetings.
Where's our good friend Luloff? I don't see him on the screen yet. Is Kit's here? I don't even see. Oh, yeah, there's Kit's. Perfect.
Oh, you've got the rural residential land survey tomorrow. I should
Oh,
look
exciting.
look at that.
I think we have enough people here. So I think good morning, everybody. First of all, before we proceed, we'll do just a quick roll call and remind everyone that we need a minimum 6 present to maintain quorum. So Kelly, if you mind doing the honors.
Councillor Luloff. Councillor Dudas. I'm here. Councillor El Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Deans.
I'm here.
Councillor Fleury.
Good morning.
Councillor Menard.
Present.
Councillor Kitts. Here. Councillor DeRuse. Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Vice Chair Leeper.
Good morning.
And Chair. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Kelly. We have no regrets that were presented, no declarations of interest. Confirmation of the minutes 21 September 1st, 2021. Are these confirmed?
Carried.
Thank you, Diane. We have a response to inquiries, road safety intersection 8th Line and Parkway. We also looking at the agenda. So item number 1, we do have a staff presentation update on winter operations. So we'll hold that item. Item number 2, the automated speed enforcement and school bus came on that. And we actually do have a motion from Councillor Deans that I believe there's also a friendly amendment by Councillor Menard that will go into it, and it is fully staff supported. I see nodding of heads by both members of council, so that's good. We'll deal with that when we get to it. Item number 3, low speed vehicles. I know Omar has done tremendous work speaking to everybody. He does have a presentation if we need it, but we have no delegations. We do have some correspondence from the ACC, and we do have Michael Tremblay, which is in favor. But if we wanted to carry this item, or otherwise we'll have a staff presentation. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Great, and maybe I'll ask Michael Tremblay. Thank you, committee members. Since he's come to this and has been working so hard, if you could just, with the committee's support, to quickly give a quick 30 seconds on the work Invest Ottawa has been doing on this.
Thanks so much, Councillor Tierney, and thanks for your time this morning, Council. I just wanted to say a few words. Firstly, that the work that we do has been very, very directly connected to the work with transportation services. So we do quite a bit with Omar and Phil and team. This particular bylaw that we're looking at is really important to our business, and I'll use just a very quick case example. Last year's Tunney's Pasture project that we ran was actually run on federal lands to simplify how we could actually make it happen. We had to get special licensing from the Ministry of Transportation for Ontario, highly successful. And I think that the importance of this bylaw is to help enable our region to be a leader in mobility acceleration. In this particular example, it just happens to do with cars. And so I feel that this is extremely important for the economic development of the region. We landed another project this summer with Transport Canada, which is completely about safety. We're doing it in concert with the city. And we have new partners like the World Economic Forum who are helping us to make sure that our project adheres to some of the global safety standards that are happening. So I see it as an opportunity for Ottawa to help not only advance some of the work that we want to actually trial, but also to promote our work on the global stage. So I thank you for the consideration today, and look forward to what future projects can look like for our city.
Great. Thank you, Michael, and thanks for all your tremendous work.
Thank you.
So back to the clearing of the agenda. Item number 4, we have McKenna-Casey Drive realignment, environmental assessment addendum. We have no presentations, no delegations, or no correspondence. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Diane. Thanks, Eli. We do have IPD. It's there for your viewing about the permanent count stations, which is pretty exciting. More data. I know Vice Chair Leeper loves data, so that's a good news story. We do have a couple of other items at the end, so we'll go back to item number 1, which is the presentation by staff related to update on winter operations. Always exciting. Talking about snow now. Yay.
Thank you, Chair. Merci pour l'occasion de présenter notre mise à jour sur l'entretien de l'hiver. And yes, we're here this morning to talk about winter. I'm sure everybody's looking forward to that. I'm going to be tag teaming the presentation with my colleagues Alison Wilson and also Chad Finley, who will be stepping in at different times of the presentation. Alors, ce matin, je vais juste vérifier, is the presentation on? So just want to give Kelly an opportunity to put the presentation up.
My apologies, Chair. I don't seem to have permissions to do that right now. Bear with me for a few minutes.
That's fine. We can sing Christmas carols. You know, why not? We'll get in the mood.
Go ahead, Tim.
two people on this committee should sing, Jeff and Lulav, and no one else, please.
That is true.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So on the next slide, ce matin, nous allons vous présenter plus ou moins 4 items. Un, nous allons parler des grandes lignes sur les opérations hivernales. Nous allons vous donner une mise à jour sur la révision des normes d'entretien hivernal que nous avons entamées. Nous allons aussi vous donner une mise à jour au niveau du développement des normes d'entretien pour les rues et les espaces spécialisés. Et enfin, nous allons parler des améliorations qui sont prévues pour cet hiver. So on the next slide, when we look at the winter operations, as Transportation Committee can appreciate, we're dealing with a complex transportation network. And as you can see here, it kind of gives you a bit of an overview. I do want to give a shout out to our skilled operators and our staff. This is a 24/7 operation, a very dedicated group of staff that work often under very difficult conditions. So just want to tip my hat to our staff. And one element also that I want to highlight that's not fully reflected here is we often talk about the size of our city. And one of the key areas to keep into consideration is that given the size of our city, we actually have 4 different weather zones that we have to contend with, especially during the winter. So our response are really tailored towards the needs of the community based on the conditions that are being faced across our city. And our priority throughout all of our operations is always related to safety, keeping our residents safe, and making sure that all modes of transportation are accessible for all of our users. So on the next slide, there's a couple of elements that I wanted to speak to when it comes to maintenance standards. The first one is that the province does have a provincial regulation that deals with minimum maintenance standards. And that provincial regulation is very much focused on providing municipalities with a defense against liability. Council has also adopted winter maintenance quality standards, and these standards were actually adopted in 2003. And I can say that I'm very familiar with those standards because I was the lead on the development of the standards. And what I can indicate in that context is that our winters are different, and our operations have also evolved since 2003. So it's definitely appropriate to be revisiting our standards at this point. And I would say that the standards that Council has adopted in general basically meet or exceed the provincial regulation. And I would say that the main reason for that is it goes beyond just providing defense against liability. It looks at community needs, council priorities, and also local weather conditions that we are facing. Next slide, Kelly. Nous avons entamé à la fin de 2019 l'examen des normes d'entretien hivernal et cet exercice a procédé en 3 étapes. So I'm going to let Chad speak to what the work that we've undertaken as part of phase 1 of that review, which is really looking at the background and the peer review that we did with other municipalities. Allison Wilson is then going to speak to the work done under phase 2, which is the public engagement process and also the alternatives that we've looked at. And then phase 3, we will be coming back to committee and council in the spring of 2022 with our recommendations and also an implementation plan. So more to come, but we wanted to be able to provide committee with an update in terms of where we stand with the review process. So at this point, I'm going to hand over the floor to Chad Finlay.
All right, thanks, Alain, and thank you, Chair and committee, for the opportunity to speak today. Kelly, if we could just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll take a quick couple minutes to provide the background on the phase 1 approach that we took to the review of the maintenance quality standards. And this was really about evaluating the previous standard from 2003, which has served us very well to this point, and really trying to identify the needs and trends that we foresee moving forward. So we really took the opportunity to evaluate the needs related to the changes in the transportation master plan, our pedestrian plans, as well as our cycling plans, and really evaluate what the planning initiatives that have certainly evolved since 2003 in the development of the current maintenance quality standards. So certainly, our growth management strategy, and really that movement towards the 15-minute neighborhoods that we're drafting in the next official plan. We also took the opportunity to evaluate the elements that lead to the thriving communities within our city. Certainly a component related to well-being with the slips, trips, falls, and claims that we undertake, as well as really trying to identify the needs to have an accessible network usable for all users. So, considering our equity inclusion, our gender strategy, as well as the trend towards the older adult population. We'll just move to the next slide, Kelly, please. The next part of our phase 1 review was really a peer review with many different municipalities, for the most part across the northern snowbelt of North America, as well as a couple identified leaders in Europe. Being in the snow maintenance business, it's certainly difficult to compare with other cities and really provide a monumental benchmarking exercise, and particularly with Ottawa's geographic size and the spread of our community types when it comes to our urban, suburban, and rural components. However, we really did our best to identify leaders in the industry, as well as cities that really had synergies with the city of Ottawa. From that, we really understood that Ottawa does, for the most part, provide a high level of service comparing with many municipalities. For some municipalities in the northern area still are very dependent on residents to provide a certain level of service, particularly when it comes to sidewalks and pathways. Many cities deploy much later than the city of Ottawa when it comes to events that have accumulation. And for the most part, some have different strategies when it comes to on-street snow storage and removal processes. We did uncover some innovations that are practiced in these other cities that are certainly fairly easily adopted within our operation. Things like getting our operational staff to participate on a more frequent basis when it comes to design and construction, and hopefully identify any potential maintenance issues that may have dependencies on a higher level of service moving forward. Many other municipalities are providing increased levels of training to their 311 response staff when it comes to winter maintenance, and it allows them to reduce their service requests, as well as hold service requests that may not be warranted until which time the storm has reached the required intensity to deploy those levels of resources. And it allows staff to the opportunity to focus on operational projects as opposed to transitioning into more of the inspection mode. That, for the most part, wraps up my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Allison for an update on phase 2 of the progress.
Thanks, Chad. Phase 2 of this project marked the beginning of our public engagement campaign. Knowing that winter maintenance affects everyone here in the city, we wanted to ensure that we reached any and everyone who wished to contribute their feedback to the standards update. We worked very closely with our internal partners in the Accessibility Office, along with specialists in the newly formed Gender and Race Equity, Indigenous Relations, Diversity and Inclusion team to develop the various tactics we used throughout our campaign. We also formed a stakeholder and diverse community group engagement team whose mandate was to provide feedback on the campaign itself, including promotion and advertising, like where and how best to reach members of certain communities and/or special interest groups, as well as survey and workshop content development. Members from this group include community associations, school boards, private snow contractors, our city snow moles, just to name a few. We first interviewed 30 of our own staff to identify needs and opportunities to improve standards. We also received 250 comments on our Engage Ottawa webpage, which helped provide insight into some of the main concerns that Ottawa residents have. We conducted 2 different surveys, the first of which was a public opinion research panel, whereby 999 respondents were surveyed. This number is statistically significant and provides a confidence level of approximately 95%, with a margin error of plus or minus 3%. This survey ensured respondents were representative of city demographics and council wards. The second survey we conducted was through our Engage Ottawa website, of which we received 776 responses. And lastly, we had over 200 participants attend 4 virtual engagement session workshops that were held at the end of January of this year. All these tactics were conducted between November of last year and February of this year, when we knew that winter ops would be front of mind for residents and stakeholders in Ottawa. Next slide, please. Our campaign focused on generating meaningful dialogue amongst residents and stakeholders, as opposed to soliciting feedback directly on the technical aspects of the standards themselves, such as deployment triggers and treatment standards. We really wanted to understand what Ottawa residents felt and thought when it came to winter standards, both in how they exist in present day, as well as what they should look like in the future. More specifically, what are the gaps, challenges, and/or positive aspects of the existing standards? And what are residents looking for in future standards, both in terms of ideas for enhancements and where the public thought our guiding principles and priorities should be? Amongst all of the different engagement tactics, overall satisfaction with the current standards is fair. However, respondents want to see an increase in standards for sidewalks, pathways, and residential roads. When thinking about guiding principles and the consideration given to different lenses to guide the new standards, injury prevention and maintaining accessibility and inclusivity for all mobility levels were prioritized. While part of our team was conducting the engagement process on our winter maintenance quality standards review, our partners within PIDE's public realm and urban design team were focused on consulting with business and tourism leaders for the creation of new maintenance quality standards for the specialty spaces and streets here in the city. This engagement process occurred in February of this year and confirmed the need for enhanced standards to adequately maintain specialty streets and spaces. Stakeholders prioritized cleanliness, hard surfaces, and asset repairs. Next slide, please. So just like I mentioned, concurrent to the review of winter maintenance standards, public realm and urban design staff were defining specialty spaces and streets. These are high-profile public spaces and streets with unique designs that are increasing in number across the city. They foster community identity, support local businesses, and project positive national and international image. They have distinct design and materials which require an enhanced level of service. To date, maintenance of these spaces has been undertaken informally through collaboration between PWES and PIDE, with specialty streets receiving the same winter maintenance as sidewalks and pathways. The development of formal year-round standards was initiated in 2020 and is aligned with urban design and public realm goals in the new draft official plan. Staff will continue to develop maintenance quality standards for specialty streets and spaces and provide an update in the winter maintenance standards report next spring. Next slide, please. Switching gears back to our winter maintenance standards review, phase 2 of this project also marked the creation and development of 3 increasing incremental enhancement for each existing standard within the scope of this review. Each standard for each classification within residential roads, so class 4 and 5s, sidewalks and pathways, as well as the winter cycling network, was given a moderate, progressive, and aspirational option alternative to the existing standard. For each of these options, a high-level cost estimate was calculated based on 2019 operational costs. Each of the options was then evaluated against our project's guiding principles, like strategic fit, So how the options satisfied elements within our key planning documents, like the Transportation Master Plan and our draft official plan, inclusion, safety, livability, and climate sustainability. In this evaluation, we prioritized maintenance of active transportation facilities based on current council priorities and resident and stakeholder feedback. And at this point, I'll hand it back over to Alain to review the incremental enhancements we've been working on for this winter.
Thanks, Ali and Chad. On the next slide, maintenant, j'aimerais parler des améliorations qui sont prévues pour cet hiver. As I mentioned before, our operations are always evolving to address both the changing climate conditions and also the needs of our communities. And there's 4 areas that I wanted to focus on in terms of continued improvements for this coming winter. The first one is really related to how we respond to events. And what you've seen over the last 2 winters is certainly for our teams to provide more focus on sidewalks and also some of the residential areas based on the concerns that we were hearing, mainly related to mobility concerns. The other element that you will continue to see this coming winter is us taking a more aggressive position, especially early in the winter, in terms of responding to events. And really what we're trying to do through that proactive process is try to minimize the amount of snow and ice that packs onto the streets, which then become very difficult and expensive to remove. The other area of improvement also that we're going to be implementing for this winter to address the concerns that we often hear from residents around why am I always the last person on the beat? By the time the plows get to my street, everything is packed down and the condition of my local street is in worse condition than everybody else. So what we're going to be doing for this winter is still keeping the same residential beats that we have, but instead of always starting at the same point and ending at the same point, we're going to be alternating the starting points of our residential operation. So what that means are basically 2 key things that residents will see is one is the plows at different times, and also they should see more consistency in terms of the condition of residential roadways. So it'll certainly be something that we'll be reaching out to the councillors throughout the winter just to see what type of feedback they are getting from their communities. On the next slide, in terms of innovation and technology improvements, this year is no different in terms of the ongoing changes that are being anticipated. So there's a few that I wanted to highlight on this slide. The first one is related to a pilot that we are going to be undertaking in an urban area and also the suburban area for our sidewalks, and that's to use what we call as pre-treated salt. On our roads right now, when we actually apply salt, we pre-wet the salt with a calcium chloride solution, which allows basically the salt to react sooner. It also adheres to the road surface better. We don't have that same ability on our sidewalk plowing equipment. So what we're going to be piloting is basically a pre-treated salt, which we hope will help basically improve the sidewalk conditions and also allow us to be more efficient in terms of our salt use. So based on the outcome of that pilot, we would be evaluating it to see whether or not there's benefit to applying it to a citywide basis in the upcoming years. Another area that we've gradually been migrating to, and we're going to be applying it on a citywide basis this winter, is moving away from sand to more of a grit product. A grit is basically a very small stone product. And what we've seen is basically benefits from that in terms of more traction, especially when we have colder conditions, environmentally benefits in terms of less dust and less fines getting into our storm systems, and easier also to clean up in the spring. The other element that I wanted to highlight were a pilot that we actually undertaken in previous years related to what we call are basically rubber blades. It's basically a rubber insert on our street plows. This is basically applies to our road plows. And we're going to be applying that across all of our road plows this coming winter. And there's really 3 benefits that we've seen from that rubber blade technology. One is given that the rubber is, they're not as noisy. They adhere to the road surface a lot better. And the third one, and probably one of the big benefits, is they cause less plow damage when the plows hit raised ironworks, so raised manholes, which has significant impacts in terms of the cost to repair the plow and the plow assembly, and also the downtime that's associated with that. So certainly something that we'll continue to monitor as we broaden the application this winter. And then the two last points speak to technology improvements that we are doing in the service. So I communicated earlier this summer that we had rolled out tablets to all of our frontline staff. We've been gradually migrating a lot of the work that they would have traditionally done using paper onto the tablets. We'll continue that migration through the winter so that by next winter, any work that would have been done really from a paper perspective will now be done through technology. So it allows basically our operation to be more efficient, less duplication of effort, and also provides our supervisor with more timely information in terms of their operations. And we're also in the process of updating all of the GPS technology on all of our road equipment and sidewalk equipment, which again will provide us with additional monitoring and oversight capabilities. On the next slide, we speak to operator training. We firmly believe that the more information that we provide to our frontline operators, which with the understanding as to why certain elements are important, will allow them to make better decisions. So one of the elements that I wanted to highlight that we have been working with our accessibility office is related to a training program for our operators to ensure that in the course of performing their operations, that they're not introducing barriers to various accessibility needs. So for example, at intersections, near push buttons, just to name one. And we're also continually providing our operations staff with training related to climate change and why our operations are always evolving based on what we're seeing from a climate perspective, and also related to our salt use. We understand the importance of salt, but we also understand the impact of salt that has environment, and we want to make sure that our operators understand that balance between public safety and also environmental impacts. And then finally, the last piece on the next slide of improvement is related to our communication. So you've seen us ramp up over the last 2 winters our communication. Last winter, every event you saw basically communication from myself. You can expect to see that again through this winter. And basically for every event, we'll be communicating the type of event that we're anticipating, what's in the forecast for the next couple of days or week that's also affecting how we're responding, and then how we're responding to the event. And that's going to be critical also to support the first point that I spoke about our proactiveness and being more aggressive, especially early on in the winter. So we want to make sure that the councillors and also the community have as much information as possible in terms of understanding our response to the event. We're also making modifications again this year to our parking ban. So 2 key areas that I wanted to focus on. We continue with the ability to basically call a parking ban either a daytime ban or a nighttime ban. What we are moving are basically set times where in the morning or in the afternoon when we would be calling basically the nighttime or the daytime ban. So by doing so, hopefully we provide basically residents with more notification as to when a ban is being anticipated. It also allows our media relations team to be able to push that message out, and also our bylaw colleagues to be able to resource to be able to support us through that period. Now, I do want to be open that by trying to be proactive and providing it as much leeway in terms of calling a ban, is that Mother Nature will throw curveballs at us where weather conditions will evolve, and we will have to tailor our operations to that. But we're hoping that at least for the majority of time that we're able to provide residents with more lead time when we are calling a parking ban. In our business areas, we've also made, especially over the last winter, significant changes in terms of providing exemptions to try to minimize impacts to our business communities. So that process will be fully implemented at the beginning of this winter. And then the last piece that I wanted to focus on this slide is when the province last updated the provincial regulations. It included a new provision for municipalities to declare a significant weather event when Environment Canada declares a winter hazard. So when Environment Canada declares a winter hazard, we're going to be looking at our ability to meet our standards for that event. And if we see that because of the nature of the event, we're not going to be able to meet the standards, at that point, we would be informing the community that we are declaring a significant weather event. And that what that means is really from a communications and a public expectations perspective is that given the size of the event, we're not going to be able to meet the standards. It's going to take us longer to get through the event, but all of our resources are being deployed and we're going to be getting through it as quickly as possible. Next slide, Kelly. Finalement, pour conclure notre présentation, pour l'hiver à venir, nous allons fournir avec les membres du conseil de l'information qui est connexe avec leur quartier. Nous allons implémenter aussi toutes les mesures qui ont été mentionnées ce matin et nous allons continuer aussi à développer les normes d'entretien pour l'hiver. And in the spring of 2022, as I mentioned, we're going to be bringing forward to Community and Council with our recommendations and also an implementation plan related to the winter maintenance standards. So Chair, this concludes our presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alain. And I know I want to thank you. I've been on council for 11 years. Last winter was probably one of the smoothest ones I've seen yet, and it looks like some of the things you have here are only going to make things better. So at this point, I'm going to go to committee members. And so first off, we have Councillor Eli Shintiri. Eli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Alain and Mr. Finley and Ms. Wilson for your presentation and also for meeting with my office. And one of the things, Alain, we can give credit a little bit to Mother Nature. The last couple of years, the winter was not as what used to be before the last couple of years, basically. And I know as far as budget and so I know no one of us has a crystal ball, but I mean, if we have different winter than what we have seen in the last couple of years, are we in a position to maintain that service we had already delivered in the last couple of years? Because right now, obviously, the community's expectation is a little bit higher than what it was before a couple of years ago.
Chair, thank you for the question. And you bring up a good point that, yes, over the last 2 winters, we've certainly had more favorable winters, certainly less than what we would consider to be a normal or typical winter. We typically budget for a normal winter. So our intent is to continue to provide the level of service that we have provided in the past, but we are dependent on what Mother Nature throws at us. But the type of response that you've seen over last winter is what you can expect moving forward. What we're hoping to see, and certainly if we listen to the predictions right now, they are calling for probably a less favorable winter this winter. So we'll actually be able to put to a good test the improvements that we have put in place over the last couple of winters to see how do those fare through what we consider to be a more normal winter. But our commitment is to continue to deliver that high quality of service that we have in the past.
And one of the area, Mr. Gauncier worked for us in the past, also the communication piece. The communication piece was cleared, was set up in a way where we can deliver it to different part of the city. As we all know, the city of Ottawa is a large geographic city, and the need or the diverse of work is different. You know, in my community, I need more like a snow plowing. Other area, they need snow removal, or they need the sidewalk or the bicycle lane. For us, if our road is not open or it's not plowed, none of the emergency vehicles or anyone can move because we don't have any other part of transportation other than our own vehicle. So, but I'm glad when we talk to staff that they have to take that in consideration. And we know the last couple of years worked for us. The question is, we need to continue that communication. So when someone call our office, we say, well, no, this is when the equipment is going to be out, and I like the idea because we always have so many questions about why my house or my street is the last street to get plowed. Now we're going to rotate, and rotation is great. It'll create that at least fairness because we can't be everywhere at the same time. We understand that, but I think the communication piece, it still has to be out there, and the social media help you quite a bit, and even the newscast and other one, they were interviewed by your staff. So I hope you'll maintain that level of communication, because we get very few calls in the last few years, where other years we receive a lot more. So I just want to kudos to staff for managing the expectation and also communicating the message. That's what I'm looking for, to continue with that. But with that, I thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my question. But thank you, Alan, and your team for meeting with our office and go through this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, if I can just quickly comment on that is, we can't control Mother Nature, but what we can control is basically how we communicate and how we respond, and that you certainly have our commitment that the proactive communication and the proactive response that you've seen will continue to be the MO for the coming winter. What remains to be seen is what type of winter Mother Nature throws at us.
Great. Thank you, Alain, for that. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's excellent to see, and having the timeline for the updates to the standards for 2022 will be very, very helpful as well. Like Councillor El-Shantir, I'm very happy to hear about the rotation and then some of the other changes you're making to enhance service. And I think last year was overall very, very good. I want to thank staff. Our frontline staff are excellent and always responsive, as well as our management staff on this file. They really are responsive when an issue comes up in the community. So thank you to all for what you do. I do have a few questions. One is around the parking bans. I'm just wondering, staff's perspective of, I know we touched on it, but how it's gone. We've kind of seen a shift from those nighttime bans to more daytime bans. And I noticed during the daytime bans, I get a lot more calls from residents, and I guess it's just a shift in behavior. So wondering more on how staff think that is going, and other areas that maybe help with that communication that we can do on the councillor side to help you as much as possible.
Yeah, Chair, we've certainly seen some growing pains in terms of moving to the ability called daytime bans. The daytime bans for us are important to make sure that we're able to tailor operations to what Mother Nature is in terms of evolving climate conditions and the changing weather and winters. Is we're getting a lot more freeze-thaw cycles, certainly a lot more wet snow that gets packed on a lot more quickly. So manner, and also working with our media relations partner to be able to push that information out to the community. So we're going to be using all channels that we have available to make sure that we get some able to push them.
Okay, thank you very much. And appreciated Allison's portion of the presentation as well. One of the things we've done, and it could have been a facet of coming in during that 2018-2019 winter, which was absolutely overwhelming at that time, right? I remember having every single one of my office staff on the phone and myself talking to residents at the same time when that winter. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. I'm not sure who that is. Talking to residents at the same time. Okay, thanks. I guess someone else went on mute there. Thank you. So we held a big forum. Staff attended that forum with the 5 urban wards. We then released a couple of papers on this. So winter maintenance clearing, then we did a survey as well. And the big things that were coming from those discussions were really the issues of, being active in the winter. Basically walking on paths. No matter where you were in the city, we were seeing results come in that people were concerned about walking on paths, multi-use paths and sidewalks, the cycling network in the winter, which we need to keep enhancing as we shift to modal share, as well as the clearance in front of bus stops and the snow clearing in the crossing. So if you're crossing an intersection, sometimes you see that pile up happen near a button you might need to press to get across the street. So those were some of the main kind of feedback we had from a lot of this. And the other point I'll just make is local businesses are also affected by this. We have a lot of local businesses in the core, and it's not just the street they're on, but how you get to that street. And so we had a survey, and it went out, and 61% of respondents said they are less likely to shop at a local business if their street isn't cleared and ready, accessible for them to access them. And so obviously there's an effect on all of this, and just wanted to hear your response on some of those concerns that we've been hearing throughout this term, and a lot of the work that has gone into a couple of these papers and forums that we've been holding, and how the city might respond in the next little while with the update of those standards to those specific issues.
Yeah, Councillor, we appreciate the feedback that we did receive from your community, and I would say that the feedback that we did receive through your survey was very consistent in terms of the feedback that we've received through the different engagement channels that Allison referred to, and certainly the focus on sidewalks, pathways, even the local streets. The feedback that we've got really evolved over time, where it wasn't just clearing local streets wasn't just about cars. It was also for safe passage for residents, especially where they don't have an alternative option, such as a sidewalk to be able to walk. But certainly the feedback that we've received has definitely been incorporated into our overall engagement process. What I would say is that over the last couple of winters, what we're trying to do is we do have a finite amount of resources. And we're trying to allocate those resources as best to the community needs that we're hearing. But it's always a balancing act that we're trying to maintain, especially when we get those more significant events where we're getting a lot of snow that turns into freezing rain, and then suddenly 12 hours later, we're into deep freeze. Those are probably the most challenging events for us because we just can't keep up in front of the event. So the only commitment that we can make is that basically we're deploying basically all the resources that we have, and we are trying to put priority to what we're hearing from the community in terms of the sidewalks, the pathways, and also our street network.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your work, LA, and your whole team's work. This is really excellent to see, and I'm looking forward to that update next year. Thanks, Chair.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Councillor Dudaz.
Great, thank you very much. Actually, Councillor Menard touched on a couple of the points that I wanted to speak to about the daytime parking ban. One of the things, and Ellen, you've already gone into this, but I am going to highlight that not everyone is on social media. So as you do work with PIMR and through the city's mechanisms, I would really encourage to look at maybe more of the traditional ways of getting some of the messages out, at least early on in the season, because that is the only, I have nothing but praise for your operators of the last year and a half. Absolutely phenomenal service, but that was the one sticking point, and that, people were caught off guard by a daytime ban. And, the way that we can communicate that out, everybody sees the value in it, but being able to get to folks early on to let them know that it's going to be a change in behavior over the winter, over the entire course of the winter, to sign up for those alerts. If we can look at non-social media also as an avenue to get that message out, very much appreciate it. So that's just some feedback that I've heard from my residents. But what I wanted to touch on, and I know you're going to be coming back with a report in 2022, is I guess just maybe food for thought. And if you don't have an answer here, I just want to share this. I've had the opportunity to walk through many of the routes in my community with members from the Council on Aging and other community members who may have accessibility requirements or needs. And the operators are doing a phenomenal job. It's been much improved since that one really quite miserable winter that we had early on in this term. But it's been really, really good, except that there's a couple of spots that are traditionally and constantly issues. And it's, we live in a winter city. Nothing's ever going to be absolutely perfect. But as part of your work, the report that you're going to come back, is part of your training is to work with your operators who are there all the time to help identify some of those trouble spots, and then maybe work with ISD partners to address them. And I'm going to give you a specific example. Along Jeanne d'Arc, there's some sidewalks that are shaded and sunken. So once again, those are pooling with ice almost half the winter. And some of the seniors in the community have identified that as huge gaps where they can't cross over without going on to snowbanks. So is that part of kind of the work that you're doing, or how would you address that in the report that's to come?
Yeah, Councillor, thank you for bringing up those 2 points. So one I appreciate the comments on the parking ban, and yes, any way that we can try to get the message out. And I think one thing that we also hadn't anticipated is when we started rolling out the parking ban, it was pre-pandemic, and we've certainly seen with the pandemic that there's a lot more people working from home, so a lot more street cars that are on the street. So that certainly has added a level of complexity to the parking ban, but to your point, just reinforces why it's important for us to get that communication out. In terms of the hotspot component, your point is very well taken, and I would say that there's 2 areas really that we focus around hotspot. One is basically areas that are more sensitive in terms of areas, so schools, where there's more of an aging population, where we need to be more responsive in terms of snow clearing. The other piece that we use point to are areas that are more of an infrastructure related, where there's essentially challenges in terms of depressions in the sidewalk where water accumulates. That's very difficult for the operations staff, because really from a deployment perspective, there's really limited ability to try to control that. So those are certainly things that when we identify, form part of the discussion we have with infrastructure around plans for renewal, because sometimes the renewal is driven based on condition in terms of the sidewalks are all broken up, but often it can also be related to the performance. Sidewalk may be in good condition, but it's not performing as it should. It's sunken, it accumulates water, and we need to do something. So we will certainly continue to reach out to your office so that those areas are certainly well known, so that we can, not only do we address it in the meantime for the winter, but we try to put plans in place to address more the systemic components related to that.
No, and that's appreciated. And I think, once again, it was a bit of an eye opener for myself over past winters to go out with folks. As I said, I went for several walks with the Council on Aging for walk audits, and just to understand that not everybody can cross certain areas safely because of mobility or accessibility issues. It's important that we're also looking at those. And I think most people recognize they're not short-term fixes necessarily, but at least if you're continuing to focus on those, and my office is happy to share that. Leads to my final question, though, is how closely, once again, you've already mentioned you're collaborating with partners in the community from different from different groups to reflect the needs, whether it's along multi-use pathways or bus stops or near schools or seniors homes. And that's wonderful. And I'm really glad to see that that's come to pass. How will you continue to do that moving forward? Because as you said, winters are out of our control, but infrastructure degrades over time, things change. How will you continue to do that in the years to come?
As Chair, as I mentioned, from a response perspective, we always work closely with the Councillor's office to really understand what those sensitive areas are. So if we need to tailor our operations, we can do so. So that's more in terms of sensitive areas, more tied to when the snow actually gets cleared. The concerns that you're bringing up that more are infrastructure related, those are part of our ongoing discussions with infrastructure staff to make sure that there's an understanding that what's driving renewal or repairs are not always just driven from a condition perspective, they're also driven from a performance perspective, and how are those assets helping to support the service. So that is an ongoing discussion, and as we can all appreciate, there's more needs than there's actually funding that's available. So it's always trying to balance basically those needs of the community. And certainly a lens that we always have is, and certainly Allison and Chad alluded to it, is one of the big lenses through the review has been around our vulnerable populations, related to having different lenses in terms of our gender lens or equity lens, to make sure that we are looking at that broader perspective when we are assessing the needs, so that we could put the proper plans in place.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for this day, Allison, your whole team, and honestly, the operators on the ground floor have been phenomenal this past winter and these past seasons, and they're very receptive to feedback and comments. So I do want you to pass that along to them.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. Councillor Fleury.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and so many good points raised. I'm of this, I guess, similar impression as Alain, that last year the daytime ban was really an issue because people were home because of the pandemic, and interrelated to communication, absolutely. Alain, I want to maybe understand. So right now there is a delay. So there's no budget pressures identified for the MQS as part of the 2022 budget. But then I start thinking of, so we get into an election cycle, and then the election year, the budget is never pre-winter. It's actually midwinter, right? So we usually have a late February budget. I guess the next budget will find itself in 2023. So then although this project is delayed, it's actually delaying 2 years. So I want to understand a bit I know as part of the MQS, there are financial elements that are to be, properly brought forward and analyzed. So I respect that, but I want to understand the logic from a political budget year review point of view.
Yeah, Chair, I think one point that I want to highlight is that we're always looking at including improvements in terms of how we deliver the service. And I certainly spoke to some of those in the presentation. You've already seen us basically pivot to address some of the needs that we have been hearing in terms of the community, more focus on the sidewalks, more focus on the pathways and some of the residential streets. So we're not just waiting for that report to react. The report is really going to be looking at incremental improvements above and beyond the current service that we have been providing. And as part of that report, you're absolutely right, there will be a phased implementation plan, because depending on to what level council chooses to increase the service, that will have an impact on our resources. Could have an impact in terms of our contracted services, equipment acquisition. So there is lead time that is required to be able to implement that. I would say that leading into next year's winter, we are getting some growth component that's being approved as part of this budget. That would also form part in terms of how do we deploy those additional resources that we will be getting through the 2022 budget. Again, with that lens around what are we hearing in terms of the community pressures, so that we can continue to do that fine tuning. So I wouldn't say that our operations are static, even though we're going to be bringing forward the report in the spring. We're always implementing improvements, and that's something that council continue to expect. Again, the 2022 report and the phased implementation plan is going to be incremental beyond what you've currently seen in terms of level of service.
No, I appreciate some clarity. So, so the spring report will have a winter 22-23 impact. Is that, will that be fair? We'll start seeing additional, more direct measures to the MQS in, like, I don't want to minimize what you're saying as you keep adjusting and adapting. It also depends on the amount of snow and ice and freeze thaw cycle. So I appreciate you're in that environment. But if we look at the report in the spring, that report will have immediate influence that following winter officially in structure.
Yeah, and I would say that the phased implementation plan is going to be phased over, depending on to what extent council wants to go with the enhancements, will be phased over multiple budget cycles. So it's not just one. And I would say that next year won't be any different than the approach that we're taking this year. Is we would be presenting to committee and council basically the improvements that they can anticipate for the upcoming winter for the 2022-2023 season, based on a lot of the items that I already spoke to, the fact that we've got those mobility improvements that will be, I would say, more baked into the operation, how we've accounted for the additional capacity through the 2022 budget, how that's being built into our upcoming season response. So I would say that it's not going to be, you're not going to see anything for next winter. It's going to be incremental, and we'll be able to articulate that as part of the upcoming report.
Okay. Two of the measures that you're well aware of in discussions with myself and your team and the community has been kind of establish specifically sidewalk beats, right? You have a number of established sidewalk beats, and within those beats now there are priority corridors because of the LRT, because of pedestrian bridges, because of additional infrastructure improvements. So, can you share with me what part of the challenge is restructuring those beats, and that's quite the work of redividing it. What is the nuts and bolts of that as we head into the winter? Because, I'll give you the specifics, which between campus and Rideau Street, there's Cumberland, which is residential, but drives a lot of the volume from campus to Byward. Same thing with Nelson, and same thing with Somerset specifically. And these are kind of LRT, campus, BIA, kind of those three things intertwined. So can I maybe have a better understanding, without being specific to my ward necessarily, but those sidewalk beats that have been in place now for generation, how are those going to be influenced and reshaped to respond to these new infrastructure needs?
Yeah, so Chair, there's two main factors that I wanted to highlight. One is we're always looking at our beats to see the efficiency of some of the beats, and some of the beats are starting to get fairly long, and I think it speaks to the point that you've highlighted. But we're always kind of looking at fine-tuning those. The other element that also leads us to alter some of the beats is when we have new infrastructure projects. So as an example, Rideau Street. Rideau Street always had sidewalks on both sides, but the sidewalks were a lot narrower than they are right now. So we've actually had to double up the equipment on those beats, given that we've got a lot more sidewalk width to maintain some similar on Elgin Street. So part of what we're going to be presenting also in our 2022 report is the fact that the growth is not just basically building new communities. It's also when we rebuild the infrastructure, and as we're accommodating more pedestrian space, that also has an impact in terms of our beats. So when we're identifying pressures on the resources, it's not always about the length of the sidewalks. It's also basically increased usage, as you pointed out, and also wider spaces that we're creating, especially through our specialty spaces and streets. And that's why those two initiatives are so closely linked together. But in terms of the specifics to your ward, we can.
I'm not asking because I don't think it's relevant to committee's interests. We can take that offline for the specifics, but I appreciate what you're saying. Maybe my last point is, one of the things we can and must do is we do have attribution for budget for staffing and staff time specifically. And one of the things we can do as committees and councillors is making sure that we publicize when those in my case it's sidewalk plow, but I assume it's just general winter equipment. So can you maybe give us a staffing update and what can we do to help? Because I know that right now your team is hiring for winter equipment, and if there's one areas that we all benefit is for full staffing in those various groups and in those yards.
Yeah, we're always updating our staffing, especially now with the leading up to the winter. So we want to make sure that we have our full staff complements. One of the things that we've maintained through the whole pandemic are continuity of operations plan. We know that right now we are vulnerable in terms of because of COVID, because of the pandemic. So we've had those plans in place since the beginning to make sure that where we're seeing resource pressures that we have contingency plans to be able to supplement our operations. So right now we're expecting that when we start the winter, we will have our full staff complement. But as you know, there's always retirements, there's always staff that are off on leave that we're always looking at basically building up our staff complement. So if somebody leaves, we have somebody else that can fill in.
And we have a labor pool, unless I'm wrong. And I know you shared with me recently a posting. Is that something you can maybe share with committee? And I wonder if the media can get it out, because that's those staffing complements and having those resources are so precious to being even able to have the flexibility that you're describing in your efforts.
Yeah, that's certainly there's two labor pools that we build for basically those casual requirements where we have either on the sidewalks or general labor pool. That's certainly something that we could share if it's of a benefit to the committee.
Yeah, I think so, because we all have our own social media network and we can advertise it. Appreciate your time. Thank you, Alain.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. I'm going through the committee members here, so I guess Councillor Hubley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just have a couple of questions, Alain, and I want to also add my praise to the work of your crews. I know it's a big operation that they oversee, and what I really appreciate is when there's a corner missed or something like that, how quick they're able to get out there and fix issues. That to me is very telling of a well-run operation. So I want to thank you for that. I've got two questions for you. One is out here and in Stittsville as well, you have pathways which function as sidewalks. They connect people to the schools and to the transit stops. And I'm just wondering if we're going to be able to service all those new pathways this year that have come up due to growth.
Yeah, so Chair, we do have a warrant system that we apply in terms of which pathways are maintained, and typically it's a factor of whether or not there's an alternate route, and ensuring that the pathways are actually built to be able to help to support our snow clearing equipment. So whenever new pathways are coming on board, we do evaluate them, and if they meet the criteria, that they get added on to our requests. I know that over the last winter we've received a number of requests for pathways that were traditionally not winter maintained to have them winter maintained. Some of them we have been able to add and accommodate. In other cases, because there were alternative paths, we weren't able to. But we have also been working with our colleagues in rec and culture, because in a lot of the cases, some of the pathways are also being sought to be more for recreational use. So snowshoeing, cross-country skiing. So we've been able to work with them to try to convert some of those pathways for those alternate use. So I would say if there's still pathways that councillors are concerned about, just to let us know so that we can make sure that we have a look at them before the winter. But I can't say that we can't commit to clearing all of the pathways that are out there, just because some of them don't meet the warrants or are not suitable to be winter maintained, because
sorry, Ellen, let me jump in there. I don't want you to clear the ones that are used for cross-country snowshoeing and horseshoes. I'm talking about the ones that are used as transit connections and to schools. The one thing you said in there that concerns me is when you say alternate routes, because one of the things I know I did with my own children, and now I have grandchildren, we use the pathways instead of the sidewalks. So if your staff are saying, well, they should be using the sidewalk versus that pathway, we don't want the kids next to the cars on the road. We want them on these safe, well-lit, and hopefully winter maintained pathways that will get them to their schools. So I'm a little concerned with your use of that term about alternate pathways. So if that comes up in my ward, at least, I'll let other councillors speak for themselves. But if that comes up in my ward, I'd like to hear about it and we can discuss it. Can I get that kind of a commitment from you?
Yeah, Councillor, if there's pathways that you're aware of that you're concerned, please reach out to us and we'll definitely have a look at them.
Okay, thank you. Now, my other question for you today is what we're seeing a lot of this year in particular is asphalt repairs on not only asphalt sidewalks, but on concrete sidewalks. And I understand from talking to you and your staff that that's because we don't have access to the typical patching material that we're using due to COVID supply chain issues. But my concern is going into, and I appreciate that you're fixing those because they're tripping hazards and everything. I'm not saying stop doing that, but my concern is going into the winter, we can expect that the sidewalk plows will probably tear those repairs out pretty quickly. So then we're back to having a tripping hazard. Is there a plan in place to do something to address that?
Yeah, Chair, you highlight a very good point, Councillor, that the reason why we do end up putting asphalt ramping on those is to address the trip hazard. The intent is to come back later with more permanent repairs. The challenge we have right now is that there's so many across the city that it's taking us a while to be able to get through them. When we do the temporary repairs, though, they are done by staff and we try to make them so that they don't get ripped up. With the plow, if they do, then we'll put additional temporary measures, but typically they understand, they're also the operators, so they understand basically trying to make those repairs so that they don't get ripped out initially. And the reason why we use the asphalt is trying to make repairs with concrete becomes very challenging. And what we've seen is the asphalt definitely adheres and performs a lot better, but we recognize that those are temporary repairs.
Okay, and so just to be clear, so your operators will be monitoring that so that we don't end up with a bunch of tripping hazards. And I have to agree with you. I've visited many of the sites that they've repaired, and your staff are doing an excellent job of patching those holes. So I appreciate their work. Okay, thank you, Alan. That's it for me, Chair.
Great, thanks, Councillor. We have committee member Deans, and then we have Councillor Gower after that. So, Councillor Deans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First off, I just wanted to let you know that Councillor Kavanaugh had to leave the meeting before she had an opportunity to ask a question or contribute to the conversation today because she had a conflict, but she wanted me to take this opportunity on her behalf just to thank the staff for including a gender lens in this report. So I wanted to do that on her behalf. Just a couple of questions from me. And one is, I like the innovation and the new approach that you're taking, starting the route in different spots. It sounds complicated though, especially because not all the snow operators are the same. So I wonder what system you're using to simplify what could be kind of confusing in a city with so many roads.
Yeah, so Chair, I appreciate the question and the comment, and we are trying to keep it as simple as possible for our operators. And really what we're implementing is basically we're not changing the beats. So the circuit that they would traditionally do, we're not changing that circuit. What we're changing is basically the starting point. So we'll be introducing either 2 or 3 different points that they would be starting. So they're still going to be doing the same circuit. It just, the only thing that we're varying is basically where do they start. And what we're hoping to do by that is to keep it simple for the operator, but also hopefully provide more consistency in terms of the condition of our residential network that residents have seen in the past. I know that we've often had questions in the past to say, well, to address the concern about equity, can you start at the end of the beat and work your way back? And what we found is that actually introduces a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of risk into the operation, because our beats are really designed to be optimal. And whenever we try to work from the end to wake up to the start, basically, and it introduces a lot of inefficiencies. So this way, we're not changing the beat for the operator, just basically where do they start. So hopefully, to your point, it doesn't introduce complexities for the operators where it becomes really cumbersome, but it is something that we'll definitely be monitoring through the winter, and we'll be looking for feedback, not just from the community, but also from our operators in terms of what further adjustments do we need to do for future winters.
Well, funny you should say that, because that was my next question, because I'm sure all the councillors hear the same thing, but lots of people feel that the snow load is not shared, and they look across at their neighbors, and by the time the plow comes back down their side of the street, they're not getting the same quantity of snow in their driveways. And so I hear all the time from people saying, could you not just reverse the beat and, give them the big snow load every second time just to share? So it's not that simple.
No, and I would say, just to understand why it's not that simple, is when we're designing our plow beats, the plow beats are always designed so that the operators are turning right. And that's the safest and the most efficient operation. Whenever we reverse it, then what happens is we start introducing a lot more left turns, which means that one is we're cutting across lanes, which means that we're leaving snow through the true lane. And we're also turning left a lot more, which introduces more conflict points between traffic and the operator. So that's the main issue. We do try to be as equitable as we can in terms of the plow width, but that also is dependent on the equipment that your operator is having to operate. Where they have the flexibility to try to share basically the pain equally, they certainly do that, but sometimes the equipment that they have restricts them in terms of how narrow they can keep some of the lanes.
I represent a community that is aging, and there are a lot of elderly residents still living in their family homes, and they're obviously finding it quite difficult to deal with the snow loads in their driveways. And sometimes I have people asking if the driver could lift the plow when they hit those elderly residents' homes. Is that something that we do or we have considered doing?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. The way that we deliver the operation right now is as efficient as we can, and we recognize that it has an impact on residents in terms of introducing snow into the driveway. And I would say the ones that tend to be more impacted also are typically the first homes after an intersection, because there's a lot more snow that's being introduced. Unfortunately, if we had to stop at every intersection to lift the plow to not put the snow has to go somewhere. We have to be able to carry that snow. And also it's just keeping track of, okay, which driveway are we doing? So we do definitely recognize that for some residents, there's difficulties. Certainly we're encouraging residents to either look at the snow mold program or even contracted services where that's available to them to be able to address that concern. The only time that typically we will go back to address a driveway is if we're especially on a second pass where there's been a lot of freezing and we might leave larger chunks into a driveway and it's more of a one-of. In those cases, yes, we will go back to help out, but that certainly is not that's not the norm on a normal plow route.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Finally, Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to focus in on the daytime parking bans. First of all, I'm glad that staff is experimenting with other ways to do parking bans to find more efficiencies. And I'm sure throughout last year, you found out what works and what doesn't work. I think the communication has been a lot better. There's a lot of positives, but I wanted to just describe two scenarios and ask about how you are coordinating with bylaw and enforcement. So one would be around home care workers, healthcare workers who are visiting patients in the home. It's one thing if it's in a large home with lots of space in the driveway, but we have a lot of, say in Stittsville, a lot of townhomes where there is only one driveway space. And I appreciate that the daytime parking bans are only a few times each year, but there could be a lot of circumstances where there is no other place other than the street for, say, a nurse to park if they're visiting a senior at a townhome. Another scenario would be around schools, where we're seeing more and more parents driving to schools, and we are asking parents to park further away and walk the last few blocks with their kids to schools. But if they're doing that, then they're parked illegally during a daytime parking ban. So I know that we do have to keep cars off the street, but also it's most important to ensure that cars are off the street before the plows arrive and not afterwards. And I'm wondering, what is the communication and coordination with bylaw enforcement to make sure that that enforcement's only happening when it's absolutely needed, which is before the plows arrive? How does that happen, and how can we minimize the ticketing of cars to only when it's absolutely necessary to keep them off the streets?
Yeah, so Chair, the enforcement is, as you point out, is definitely a key element for us to be able to properly clear the roads, because the more cars are on the street, the less effective our clearing operations. I think the first point that you highlighted is something we'll need to take away with our colleagues in bylaw, because when they're going on and ticketing, they don't necessarily know the reason why the vehicle is there. It may be for a very legit reason, but when they're going around a ticket, they see the car. They know the parking ban is in place, and then they would be looking at ticketing. So we'll take that one away to see, because one thing we would encourage residents, if they're there for a short period of time, is also to kind of keep an eye out on their vehicle. So if they see the bylaw officer around, they can actually step out to let the officer know what's taking place. So that in the field communication may be the quickest way, but we'll take that one away. The one related to the school areas, certainly a good point, and again, I think it's a point of sensitivity that we'll raise with bylaw in our discussions. But again, the challenge for them is they see the vehicle, they don't necessarily understand the purpose of why they're there. But we'll certainly raise with them, because we're always in constant communication with them related to sensitivity around school zones, especially at the beginning of school and at the end of the school day, because that's when we would expect to see cars in those areas. So thank you for certainly flagging those concerns.
Yeah, and I've flagged it with bylaw as well. I just hope we can get to the point where we're really targeting our bylaw and our enforcement to get out and get cars moved off the street before the plows are there. Like, I hope that's a point we can get to, so we're not sending out bylaw in the afternoon after the streets have already been cleared. Recognize it's only a few times a year, but those daytime bans do have an impact, and they are very different in terms of a parking situation than the nighttime. So hope we can work more with your team, Alain, and with bylaw to try to minimize unnecessary enforcement. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Seeing no more questions, I just wanted to also one quick question, Alain. Back a few years ago, we did make the modification and increase the budget a pretty substantial amount. I think that's helped us stay out of the deficit column. Do you feel, and I know we keep talking about, we think there's going to be more snow. I mean, I guess we're believing the Farmer's Almanac, but until we actually have winter, you won't know. Do you feel you have sufficient budget to be able to operate like the last previous years to ensure we stay out of a deficit situation?
Yeah, Chair, as I mentioned before, we typically budget for more of an average year. So there's years, as you've seen last year, where we actually turn a surplus. This year we're in a good position, but winter's not done yet. We still have till the end of the year, so we'll wait to see. But if we continue to see similar conditions to what we experienced in the first part of the winter, we may also be in a good position this year. If we get more of an average winter, we should be fine. Where we tend to be challenged is when we get into those winters that go beyond what is more of a typical or more normal winter, and that's where we tend to be more of a deficit. Our intent right now is that, yeah, there's years that are going to be unders, there's years we're going to be over, but overall, we are in a much better position than we were a few years ago.
Terrific. And like all my colleagues, big thanks to you and your staff. Please pass that on to them. They do a terrific job, especially the last few years. And it's our bread and butter. One of my colleagues reminded me, one of my quotes was, people really care about snow, and they do. So anyway, thank you very much for that. So on this item, is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Aye.
Thanks, guys. So we'll go back to item number 2, automated speed enforcement and school bus camera pilot project. We do have a presentation, and just before we jump into the presentation, I thought this would be a good opportunity because I know in Facebook groups, sometimes there's some myths that pop up about automated speed enforcement. And I just wanted to go over a couple of things. I find it funny because even in one of my community Facebook groups, a police officer, not Ottawa Police, said, I got a ticket for going 2 kilometers an hour over the limit. And I asked him, can you please have a look at that ticket again? And he said, oh, never mind, it was 12. That's a lot of these things are, so I've done a quick Mythbusters here. And so, you know, our goal with automated speed enforcement is to really create safety, especially for the school age children where we're actually putting these. Vehicles that have Quebec license plates don't receive automated speed enforcement tickets. That's one of the myths I've heard. That's completely false. Vehicles from Quebec do receive tickets from our automated speed enforcement cameras. If you're going a couple kilometers an hour over the speed limit, you'll get a ticket. Again, like I said off the top, it's false. Although we won't know exactly what the speeds are, rest assured you won't get a ticket for going a couple of kilometers an hour over the speed limit. And at the end of the day, people shouldn't be speeding. Cameras are placed in spots where drivers can't see them. False. We sign the locations. We tell you where the cameras are. That's one of those things that keeps popping up in many Facebook groups. Automated speed enforcement is just a pure cash grab. Again, false. We put them in locations. It's a data-driven approach. And, you know, it considers a lot of different things, whether it's the percentage of traffic traveling below the speed limit, the numbers of vehicles going over 15 kilometers an hour in certain posted areas, whether the school is involved and they really want to look at the safety issues in front of a school. So there's a lot of real data that goes into where we place these traffic measures. We also look at a lot of the items that where this money goes to. We deliver networks of screening process to identify the intersections where we have instances of collisions, of left turns. As a result, 10 locations citywide have now received protected left turn phasing signaling. Implementation of engineered traffic calming measures to achieve 30-kilometer-an-hour operations in the vicinity of schools. All these things are done with the money that we receive. It doesn't go back into the general coffers. It goes back to helping improve safety on our roadways. On that, I think what we have in front of us today is a very smart stepped approach. And I want to thank Phil and the team for putting this presentation together today. But I apologize to my committee members. I had to get it out there. I know we all see it on our community Facebook groups, and I just thought, let's do a quick Mythbusters. Anyway, on that, I've talked long enough. I'll turn the floor over to Phil and the crew for a presentation. And I'm just looking at Kelly. We do have a motion as well from Councillor Deans that has an amendment with Councillor Menard. Would it be appropriate that they read that in now before we start, or should we wait till after the presentation?
Chair, that's up to you.
Being cognizant of time, I know Councillor Deans had some things going on. Maybe we'll go ahead and Councillor Deans, if you wanted to go ahead and read your motion. And I don't know where the friendly amendment will pop in. Councillor Menard, I believe, has supplied that to you as well, Kelly.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll read the motion. Maybe Councillor Menard can read the amendment that I'm accepting as friendly.
Sounds good.
Whereas there are streets in the city of Ottawa where street racing occurs, creating a dangerous environment for all users of the road who travel on these streets, and whereas residents continue to be concerned with their safety as they travel on these roads, and whereas it is not possible to have continuous police enforcement on these streets to address the high-speed drivers and street racing problem, and whereas automated speed enforcement cameras near schools have shown to be effective at reducing high-end speeders, which are drivers that travel at speeds in excess of 15 kilometers an hour over the limit by 72%. And whereas data from the public survey conducted by the City of Ottawa for the use of automated speed enforcement cameras in the City of Ottawa indicate that 65% of residents support their use on any roadway where there is speeding. Therefore, be it resolved that staff be directed to develop a data-driven selection criteria for high-speed roadways that would identify and prioritize streets where speed cameras could be used to reduce high-speed drivers and street racing. And be it further resolved that the City of Ottawa pilot the installation of automated speed enforcement cameras at 2 locations based on the selection criteria for high-speed roadways in 2023 and report back to Transportation Committee on the effectiveness of the cameras at reducing the number of high-end speeders on streets through the 2024 Road Safety Action Plan Annual Report in Q4 2024. Mr. Chair, when we get to this, I'd be happy to speak to it, but I'll just turn the floor over to Councillor Menard for the amendment.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Deans for this very helpful motion. Fully support it. The addition that I have there, I've sent it to Kelly, but I can read it out. Be it further resolved, and it would go at the end, Chair, of the motion, be it further resolved that the City of Ottawa pilot the installation of automated speed enforcement cameras at 2 additional locations based on rates of incidents of speeding in communities with a high pedestrian modal share. And I can speak to that later if you'd like, Chair. Appreciate staff's assistance on this and Councillor Dean's assistance on this as well.
Great, terrific. And if anyone's wondering, staff do support this. So I thank you for working with our staff. So on to the presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and glad to be here today to present to you the findings of our pilot report. I just also want to thank our teams at the city. We had Finance, Service Ottawa, IT, Legal that helped us in the preparation of this report, as well as during the pilot as we observed the things that we saw. So Krista Tanaku, who's our Manager of Traffic Safety and Mobility, will be doing a presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Phil. This presentation will provide an overview of the items that are covered in the Automated Speed Enforcement and School Bus Camera Pilot Projects report. Next slide, please. The presentation will summarize the outcome of the Automated Speed Enforcement Pilot Project, as well as provide recommendations for how to move forward with the program. It'll touch upon some changes to the temporary traffic calming program, provide an update on recent changes that the province introduced related to reduced school speed zone and community safety zone signage and the impacts to the city, as well as provide an update on the school bus camera pilot project. The Automated Speed Enforcement Pilot Project ran from July 2020 to July 2021 and included speed cameras at 8 sites near schools. During the year, just over 100,000 tickets were issued and approximately $5.4 million in revenue was collected. Over the course of the pilot, speed data were collected at each site on a monthly basis, which was used to determine the effectiveness of the cameras at reducing speeds. The data show that speed cameras were effective at reducing speeds at all locations, with a 200% increase in compliance with the speed limit and a 72% decrease in those traveling 15 kilometers an hour or more over the speed limit when averaged across all of the sites. In addition to the review of speed data, a survey of over 1,500 residents was conducted to determine the degree to which residents support automated enforcement initiatives. The survey was conducted in May of 2021 via an opt-in online panel. The survey sample was designed to ensure that the views of a cross-section of residents were heard, including those residing downtown in suburban areas inside and outside the green belt and in the rural areas of the city. The survey results showed that 87% of residents support the use of speed cameras near schools and 85% support use near playgrounds. Even those respondents that had previously received a ticket from the speed cameras supported the use of speed cameras to a similar level. Of those who had received a ticket, 79% indicated that the ticket prompted them to reduce their speed, either in general or when passing the cameras. 84% of residents support reinvesting the revenue into road safety. Next slide, please. Based on the pilot results, staff recommend implementing 15 new cameras by the end of 2022, selected from the prioritization list developed to identify locations for the pilot in 2019. The 2019 evaluation used a data-driven, risk-based approach to select sites which considered compliance with the speed limit, traffic traveling at 15 kilometers an hour or more over the speed limit, potential walkers, collisions, and participation in a safe and active routes to school program. It's recommended that all new cameras are selected based on the data, and that they are implemented within community safety zones to be consistent with existing cameras to increase the disincentive for speeding. When a camera is first installed, the number of tickets is high, but starts to decrease after a few months. It's therefore recommended that cameras be installed on a staggered basis at a rate of 3 cameras per quarter to allow for more consistent flow of tickets to better manage workflow for Service Ottawa and the Joint Processing Centre who process the tickets. In 2023 and beyond, it's recommended that the number of cameras be increased by 15 to 25 per year during the next term of council. There have been a number of speed limit changes and perhaps some traffic pattern changes since data were last collected. And so staff will update all of the data at the schools this fall and upcoming spring and reprioritize the school locations to reflect these changes. In addition, staff recommend including playground sites starting in 2023 and will develop selection criteria to ensure a data-driven selection process. Next slide, please. The following tables, or 2 slides, show the 15 locations being proposed at schools across the city before the end of 2022. I won't read all of them, but next slide, please. The first 3 that will be installed will be at Greenbank, Bearbrook, and Saint Laurent. They're to be installed in Q4 of 2021. Next slide, please. Moving on to the revenue, in 2019, as part of the Road Safety Action Plan, Council approved that all net revenue from automated enforcement would go towards funding road safety initiatives under the plan. Net revenue consists of revenue that remains after the automated speed enforcement and road safety operating costs are deducted. Staff recommend that a road safety reserve fund be created starting in 2022 for automated speed enforcement revenue. The net revenue from automated speed enforcement is estimated at $4.8 million in 2021 and $8.6 million in 2022 with the addition of the 15 cameras. The Road Safety Reserve will fund the annual capital budget for the Road Safety Action Plan, which has as its goal a 20% reduction in the rate of fatal and major injury collisions by 2024. The funds will go towards implementing initiatives under the 4 emphasis areas of the plan, including intersections, high-risk drivers, vulnerable road users, and rural. Initiatives are selected based on their likelihood of addressing the contributing factors that lead to fatal and major injury collisions as identified by the data review. Some examples of initiatives from the 2021 plan include protected left turns at intersections. This is to help reduce the incidence of left turning collisions with oncoming traffic or pedestrians that may be crossing in the crosswalk. Traffic calming near schools, to be used as another means of reducing speeds near schools. Design for high volume cycling and vehicle interaction locations that were identified in the study completed under the 2020 Road Safety Action Plan, and design for rural skewed intersections that were identified in the study completed in 2020. The operating costs associated with running the automated speed enforcement program include costs for the vendor, joint processing center, Service Ottawa administration, and check processing. In addition, a number of FTEs are required to deliver the program, including 6 permanent and 12 temporary FTEs for Service Ottawa to process the charges, 7 permanent FTEs for revenue services to increase the collections of outstanding fines, with each FTE expected to increase collected revenue by $250,000 per year. 3 permanent FTEs for legal services to address the increased number of Provincial Offences Act prosecutions related to automated speed enforcement. And 1 permanent FTE for IT services to help with integration and automation of the various processing tasks. Operating costs required to deliver the road safety programs. Sorry, next slide, please. Include 6 permanent FTEs that were previously approved in 2019 as part of the Road Safety Action Plan to deliver initiatives under the plan. These positions are currently filled on a temporary basis. 1 permanent FTE for traffic operations to help provide inspections for implementation of speed cameras and pedestrian crossovers. 2 permanent FTEs to deliver the pedestrian crossover program. These positions are currently filled on a temporary basis with funding coming from the pedestrian crossover capital budget. Switching these to operating will allow for more of the capital budget to be spent on implementation. 5 permanent FTEs to increase resources for temporary traffic calming program. All of these FTEs will be funded through revenue generated by ASC. The additional FTEs for the temporary traffic calming program will allow for removal and reinstatements of the existing flex stakes to be covered under the traffic services operating budget, which will allow more funds from the councillor's capital budget to be available for new locations. Over the years, as the number of flex stakes have grown, the time it takes to reinstate and remove them also increases with the existing resources. So by providing these additional FTEs, we'll be able to shorten the length of time it takes to reinstate and remove, thus lengthening the time in which the flex stakes are out in the field. The next topic covered, covered in the report is the changes that the province has made to the regulations for reduced school speed zones and community safety zones. If you recall back in 2019, when we were selecting the sites for speed cameras, there were 2 signage issues that limited our ability to implement at some school locations. The province has since introduced new regulations to eliminate those issues by providing a new sign design for reduced school speed zones that does not rely on a flashing beacon, and allowing municipalities that have bilingual signage requirements to stack the community safety zone signs one on top of another, as opposed to having them side by side, which will make it easier for us to fit them within the right of way. The change in regulations prompted staff to undertake a review of the 60+ existing reduced school speed zones in the city to determine the impacts of the signage changes may have. This also included a review of existing policy and criteria used to establish reduced school speed zones, as well as the times and speed reductions used within the zones. The review identified a number of changes that are required to bring the existing reduced school speed zones into compliance with the new regulations and the Highway Traffic Act, including a need to modify the signage to reflect the new sign design, adjust the start and end distances from the school property in some cases, and introduce new signs to end the zones. School area signage is installed at all schools, and the city has an existing policy that is used to determine where reduced school speed zone should be established. The difference in the signs is shown in the slide. The locations that have reduced school speed limits are effective during certain times of day during school months. A review of the existing criteria revealed that they're outdated, and some of the criteria is inconsistent with the Highway Traffic Act. The review of times and speeds in existing reduced school speed zones showed that they vary from school to school. Some are for a short period around bell times, while others span the full day. Also, sometimes the speed reductions varied as well. Consistency will help drivers understand what's expected of them when entering into a school zone. Staff therefore recommend standardizing the times and speed reductions used. Recommended times are 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday to Friday, September to June. This will cover the before and after school programs and midday timeframe when high school students are permitted to leave the property for lunch. The recommended standardized speed reductions are shown in the table. So a driver approaching a school zone on a 40-kilometer-an-hour roadway will know that the posted speed limit during the reduced time is 30 kilometers an hour if we apply that consistently at all school zones across the city. Next slide, please. It's recommended that all existing reduced school speed zone signage be updated to comply with the new regulations by the end of 2022, and that staff undertake a best practices review to develop a new school zone policy to update criteria for selecting locations for reduced school speed zones and report back to Transportation Committee in Q2 of 2023. The final topic covered in the report is an update on the school bus camera pilot project. The school bus cameras are installed on buses and gather video evidence of vehicles passing stopped school buses that have their stop arm extended. The pilot ran from September 2019 through to June 2021. During that time, 220 charges were issued across the 6 camera systems and approximately $38,000 in revenue was collected. There were a number of school closures due to COVID that impacted the ability for staff to gather enough information to determine the effectiveness of this tool at reducing this type of behavior. Next slide, please. In recent months, the school bus consortia have expressed a strong desire to equip the entire fleet of 880 school buses with camera systems. Evidence from the cameras is currently being reviewed and charges laid by Ottawa Police Services. Increasing the number of cameras from 6 to 880 would have a significant impact on resources if the current model were to be followed. However, recent changes to the Highway Traffic Act and new regulations introduced by the province since the start of the pilot now allow for provincial offences officers to issue the tickets for failing to stop for a school bus with an extended stop arm. This allows for municipalities to use processing centres for school bus camera infractions, similar to those currently used for processing speed camera and red light running camera tickets. So it's recommended that staff extend the school bus camera pilot through the 2021-2022 school year to gather more data and work with the school bus consortia and Ottawa Police Services to determine the impacts the proposed expansion would have and investigate the best delivery model for a program, reporting back to Transportation Committee in Q2 of 2023. This concludes the overview of topics covered in the Automated Speed Enforcement and School Bus Camera Pilot Projects reports. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And I'm just checking. I think Vice Chair Leeper had an amendment we were supposed to read in as well. Was it on this item?
Yeah, I think there's a technical amendment on this one. I'm happy to move that now, which is whereas recommendation 8 refers to the creation of a road safety capital reserve fund, and whereas operating surpluses will flow into those reserves and will offset any deficits, whereas deleting capital from the name of the reserve fund would avoid confusion, therefore be it resolved that the word capital be deleted from recommendation 8.
Great, thanks for that. Oh, semantics. All right, Councillor Deans.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Krista and Phil and your team for the work that you have done on this and for the presentation today. I want to start by just speaking to the motion that I introduced before the presentation, which is basically an expansion of photo radar cameras in 2023 and a pilot program to try and address areas where we know racing is happening on our city streets. And I'm sure all of you know the problem that has become in the city. And then Councillor Menard, I'm sure will speak to his amendment, but his refers to more vulnerable road users. For my part, I think today's presentation made it very clear that photo radar cameras are highly effective in doing what they are intended to do, which is slowing traffic. And we also learned that over 65% of residents support the use of these cameras. But Councillor Tierney referred to this at the start of the meeting. There are those who believe that it's a tax grab. And, you know, I'm not sure that they're entirely wrong. If we were to put them everywhere, especially on streets where we have artificially reduced the speed limit, then that would not be fair. So I think we have to be very judicious in the use of them, and we have to ensure that when we're putting cameras on roadways, that we're doing so in the interest of public safety, and that we're putting them in the locations where we're trying to alter the behavior and protect our most vulnerable road users. And so that really is what has led me. I agree with the approach that the city staff are taking. I agree with the school zones and the expansion that Chris just spoke to today to parks and playgrounds. I think when I met with them earlier, I suggested that when they're looking for those high volume locations, perhaps they look where community centers and parks are together, because there are a lot of people attending those locations because of the dual use there. So I mean, I think it's a staged approach. It's a sensible approach. But what I would also like to see is that speed racing that I get so many complaints about in the community I represent, and I'm sure all of you do as well, be addressed at least through a pilot to see if it's an effective one. And we use the same sort of selection criteria, data-driven, to decide where in the city that pilot would occur. And the reason that the motion speaks to 2023 is because we have to know that we have enough staff to do the processing. So this implementation has to make sure that we're being respectful of the resources that we have in place and able to process this. So that, in effect, is the motion that I've put forward. I thank the staff for working with me on that. I know the staff support this direction. So I hope the committee will support it as well. I was watching the presentation, just a question, was watching the presentation and saw the list of priorities because all of the revenue flows back into traffic. But for me, one of the key issues that we haven't addressed well in the city of Ottawa is traffic calming. We all know that we have temporary traffic calming budgets, which have very limited tools and they are seasonal. But in terms of actual traffic calming, you have to do all the studies first. You have to rise to the top. There's only a few every year that get in the queue for real traffic calming measures. And it seems to me, as we continue to expand this program, there are going to be more revenues. And I wonder the potential for flowing significant amount of money into traffic calming so that we can actually have more permanent measures, better measures in our neighborhoods going forward.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Deans. So the Road Safety Action Plan, which is the plan that we bring forward every year, that identifies the priorities that we want to work on to reduce fatalities and serious injuries, is all data driven. And so we are looking, and in the last couple of years, we've put in money for traffic calming near schools because you know, we know that that's where the most vulnerable road users are. In terms of an overall the traffic calming, there is the existing program under in transportation planning, The road safety action plan could fund those if the data supports the reduction in fatalities and serious injuries. We want to make sure that we use that funding to target the things that we're seeing that are creating those situations where people are dying or getting seriously injured. So to say that it could fund some potentially if the data shows us that there's a need there. But like I said, the focus right now is at schools, and we implemented, I think, 3 locations this year, and there's plans for 3 more next year. And as the money grows in this program, as you saw in the report, that it will increase, that they'll give us opportunities to potentially do more locations. So like I said, I want to focus on schools, and then we can look in the future if the data supports that.
Right, and that's exactly what I have in mind. I understand the approach that you're taking. I agree with the approach, makes perfect sense to me. But as we expand out the program and the revenue grows, I think that looking at traffic calming, permanent traffic calming, and how we could roll that out into our neighborhoods with some of these funds would be useful. So thank you very much. That's all from me, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. We have Vice Chair Lieber.
Thank you very much, Chair. Phil, thanks for the presentation. Krista, thanks for the presentation. I'm fully supportive, and as you know, I would like us to continue moving aggressively into automated speed enforcement, particularly. My question today, though, is with respect to the geography in which we're seeing those cameras put. There is still, in the second round of installations, no cameras in the urban core. And, you know, certainly I get that Broadview is not Woodruff, Gladstone is not Greenbank. There's a difference in the kinds of roads they are, but residents of Kitchissippi, and I think all of the downtown wards are keen to see these tools being used in our communities. Can I just ask, where are we in that list? When might we reasonably start to see automated speed enforcement on some of the downtown roads? Because I can tell you today that Kitchissippi residents feel as though there's an unfair allocation of these cameras across the city in favor of suburban and inner suburban wards.
Thank you, Chair, through you. The approach that we take to select sites is all data driven. Compliance with the speed limit is one of the main factors that helps screen in locations to be reviewed further for automated speed enforcement. There were a couple of locations that fall within the core that were identified in the top 50 list for review, such as Broadview and 4th Avenue. But both of those locations are going to be receiving traffic calming treatments through the traffic calming near schools project that's under the Road Safety Action Plan. There is a plan to collect data at all of the sites this fall and into next spring, and to reevaluate all of the school sites. There have been a number of speed limit changes, especially in the downtown core with the implementation of gateway signage at 30 kilometers an hour. Compliance with the speed limit in our last review was based on the speed limits at that time. Now compliance will be evaluated against the new lower speed limits. So that could move some of the locations up the list for sure.
No, and I appreciate it. It makes for tough conversations with residents who are very keen to see these tools being used. They're concerned about their kids who are walking to school. We obviously have a high number of kids who are walking to school in some of our urban neighborhoods. You know, it will help to explain that it's a priority list that is driven by compliance numbers. It's the data that is driving it. But I suspect I'm not telling you anything you don't already know when I pass on that we are keen to see these tools being used here in Kitchissippi Ward and in the other urban wards as well. So I'll just ask you to take that away with you. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you for that, Vice Chair. Councillor Dudas.
Great, thank you very much. You kind of touched on one of my questions in respect to evaluating sites. I was curious in terms of, as you roll out additional locations, how will you be basing your school zones that you'll be rolling them out to, the new ones? Will you be looking at ones that were on your past list? For example, there was some, Renault Road was one example that had not met some of the provincial signage criteria that was, it sounds like it's now been antiquated and has been updated. Will you be going back and looking at those existing ones, or will you require councillors to have that conversation with you again and add these back to lists for you to evaluate?
Thank you, Chair, through you. We did review for the 2021 selection all of the school zones in the top 50, especially those that had been ruled out previously because of signage issues. So several of the ones on the list this time around were those that were previously ruled out because of signage issues. So we do look at all of the sites again, and with the new data collection, we will reprioritize everything and reevaluate everything fresh for the 2023 implementation. So there's no need to request a site that had previously been ruled out to be put back on the list. It will be on the list for review.
And that's good to hear, because I do know that in for instance, with Renault Road, it's been definitely something of a priority for myself, for the schools. There's 2 schools on it, and for residents to slow traffic, because it is a very busy school zone with a high school and an elementary school. And I do appreciate that. So I'll continue to work with you to look at that. I wanted to say too that I'm very happy to hear Phil say that the focus is going to continue while we look to roll it out to community safety zones, but school zones. Because, you know, my priority is not so much to blanket the city with these things, but really use a surgical approach to target the areas where we're having the most vulnerable users impacted by these speeds, so that their safety is at risk. Because once again, you know, I am here, I don't necessarily agree with the premise, but I do hear from some residents that the kind of the perception is this could be a cash grab. And I know that we're reusing the funds to make our roads safer, but I do want to make sure that as we're selecting these sites, it is based on the data. It is based on, you know, community feedback and the need to improve the safety at these specific locations. So as you're going through the process of adding these locations, can you just reiterate, you know, what are some of the key criteria points? And I know you've said this, but I do think it's important to stress. What are some of the key criteria points you look at to make sure that you're picking the right sites for these cameras?
Thank you, through you, Chair. We look at speed data first and foremost to determine whether or not there's speeding adjacent to the school. We look at the compliance with the speed limit and the number of high-end speeders, which are those that are traveling at 15 kilometers an hour or more over the posted speed limit. And we also look at the number of kids that are not being bused to school. So we, as a surrogate for the number of kids that are potentially walking. We also consider schools that are part of active and safe routes to school programs, because there's a consolidated effort at the school to try and encourage more active travel to the schools. We also look at collisions in the with school-age children at the locations as well. So it's really a risk-based analysis. We tried to look at what the you know, the more kids you have walking, the more high-end speeders you have, the higher the risk is that there is going to be a collision. And if there is a collision, that the severity will be high. So those are the types of things that we take into consideration.
That's excellent. And I think, once again, keeping, first of all, our kids, but all of our pedestrians and community road users and safe must be paramount. I did have a question, though, that once you install one of these cameras, will you go back and reevaluate? Could they be removed at some point? Not that that is our hope, but once again, do you continue to assess it over time?
Thank you, Chair. We did, for the pilot sites, we collected data on a monthly basis at all of the locations. We will be doing a review at all new locations as well to determine the effectiveness. I suspect if we take the camera out speeds will go back up. So we don't have any plans to remove any of the locations at this time.
No, and that's fine. I just wanted to know too, because, you know, as you noted, in some areas, as additional or alternative traffic calming measures are put into place, it might change the speeds automatically anyways. So more flex states go up, or maybe some more ATM measures get put in. It might mean that the speeds are slower and that camera is a moot point because you couldn't go that fast even if you wanted to. So I'm glad to hear though that you'll continue to assess. I did have a question about the motion that's before us and the friendly amendment. I will say that, you know, my community, I completely get this, and that we do have a significant issue with people using particularly Innes Road and the Blackburn bypass as a raceway. So I'm very, very pleased to see that Councillor Deans has brought this up and Councillor Menard has added his thoughts to it. I think it is needed to look at it 100%. My only question is, though, I wanted to confirm that with the amendment that areas like Innes Road wouldn't be removed from consideration, because I think that if we're looking at addressing drag racing on our streets, it's those straightaways, it's those roads that are built for speed that we need to be really looking at slowing folks down on. So I just wanted to make sure that that is not being removed from consideration as part of the amendment.
For you, Chair, no, that's not the plan. The amendment is to look at 2 locations that are that have a high vulnerable user in the area. But there's the original motion that talks about the high speeding areas with the street racing. So it would actually be at the end of the year, the pilot would go to 4 cameras, and we would evaluate that and report back to committee in 2024 through our road safety action plan.
Okay.
And so those roads would be included in terms of, we're going to take a look at the whole city, because we based on data, and so we're going to develop those criteria over the winter and come up with some locations for next summer based on the data that we collect.
That's excellent, because as I said, like I've got in addition to the bypass, I've got Navan Road, Renault Road, and you know, and I see Councillor Kitts is nodding her head. These are all roads where you wouldn't, the rural roads, they wouldn't necessarily have as many vulnerable road users, but the reason why they don't have them is because they're unsafe. So there's kind of like that catch-22, and I don't want to rule out any of these roads as you do the analysis, because they are being used for illegal purposes for racing. So very thankful to the mover of that motion and to Councillor Menard for your amendment, because I do appreciate it. My community will as well. Thank you.
And on that, Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Councillor Dudas for those comments, and I totally agree with them and everything you've said. We shouldn't be, taking away from other areas to make sure that all our communities are safe, and fully supports that. It's really good to see the success of this pilot so far. Residents really want this form of enforcement. We've received consistent messages from residents that they want this in their neighborhood. Alternative enforcement mechanisms are useful to our city. We currently use, I guess, a more reactive form of speed reduction and safety with police officers. It's complaint driven, and of course they can't be everywhere. And we know that there can be other inequities relying on that type of enforcement. And so ASE takes a proactive approach. And one that makes meaningful change to driver behavior that roaming speed traps don't. And so that's what we want. We want change behavior more permanently and safer behavior, and that seems to occur in these areas where we have these. I can tell you some friends that have texted me about getting tickets. Certainly weren't happy when they got them, but it changed their behavior. So it's not about more tickets or more revenue. That may be a short-term result, but long-term, we want to drop in tickets because we want to drop in speeding and other dangerous behavior that comes along with speeding. Obviously, Councillor Leeper, others have pointed out some of that equity concern. Expanding it to all our communities where speed and safety is a concern. While it's understandable that a pilot would focus on a select few locations, and that we might not see that equitable application across all neighborhoods, we do need to start seeing some expansion because all our residents deserve this type of enhanced safety in those problem areas. I don't think I need to tell you about, Bronson Avenue, for example, where there is excessive speed all the time, not just in that 3-lane portion beside Carleton University and Brewer Park, directly beside a park, directly beside a post-secondary school, but right through the community, right up through to Carling and north of there. So we're seeing crazy speeds through there, and we don't have one on that street at this time. I do have some questions to staff, Chair. The first is when you're deciding on where to place cameras, we've relied on collision and traffic data since we're focusing on school zones. In your calculations, are you currently using modal share into your calculations to ensure we're offering protection to other vulnerable road users, pedestrians, others that may be vulnerable where there's high use and high speed?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, we're taking into consideration the number of potential walkers. The way in which we assess that was based on information that was provided by the schools in terms of the number of kids that are not being bused to school. And we're also looking at the participation in safe and active routes to school programs. So if a school is participating in one of those programs and has a high number of kids that aren't being bused, there are some efforts that are made by the school and the parents to encourage kids to use active forms of transportation to get to school, as opposed to just being driven to school. So there's some points allocated for schools that follow one of those types of programs as well.
Thank you for that. Many of our traditional main streets have schools and parks. Are there any provincial rules or anything else like that stopping us from putting these types of cameras on traditional main streets?
Thank you, through you, Chair. There's nothing in the provincial regulations that stops us from using them on those types of roadways. The provincial regulations don't allow for implementation on roadways with 80km/h or higher speed limits. But we're able to establish community safety zones on those types of roadways as well, and thus implement ASC in those locations. Bigger barrier might be constrained spaces and inability to fit things in sometimes, but we would have to review each location on a case-by-case basis. There are some minimum offsets for the cameras from the side of the road that have to be adhered to, and things like that as well. So that might be a larger barrier in a location like that.
Thanks very much, Ms. Tanaka. That's very helpful, and I appreciate all your work on this, yourself and Landry. We've really seen, I think, improvement, and it's in no small part because of your efforts and also your work with the province to change some of those rules around the signage to allow for these in areas that may have been more difficult in the past. I think it is important that we do see this over time in a more equitable situation across all wards, where there is, of course, data to back it up, and dangerous situations, as Councillor Dudas has also pointed out. So thanks again, and appreciate this, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Menard. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I think anyone who's spoken to me about automated speed enforcement knows I'm hugely supportive of the program. I support any measure to make our roads safer, and this is effective, proven, self-funded model. So I'm pretty excited to be talking about it today. Like Councillor Leeper, I'm a little disappointed we won't be seeing additional cameras in Ward 19 in this round, but I absolutely support placing them where they're needed most in the city. I did have an opportunity to go over the data with Phil and his team, but I'm wondering if you can respond to how did you land on the number 15 for new cameras implemented this next year?
You want to take that, Krista, or you want me to?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was slow on my mute. Thank you, through you, Chair. 15, the number 15 really came from the fact that the pilot was operated during COVID. So the data may be a little bit off with traffic volumes being lower during certain times throughout the pilot period. So we really want to take this first year of the program to make sure that we have our resourcing estimates right, and to make sure that processing moves smoothly with all of the estimates that we've developed over this pilot year. We're going to learn some more about how it operates through this coming year, and this will allow us to make adjustments as needed if required to the resourcing going forward.
Okay, I can appreciate that. My colleagues have already spoke to this, but I think that the takeaway here needs to be that, as we keep implementing these year after year as needed based on data in areas where we're concerned about safety, there in the future will be an automatic penalty for using our residential roads as recreational racetracks, as we've been seeing. And as Councillor Dean spoke to, OPS reported a 700% increase in stunt driving over the last few years. And I know this was included in the presentation, but I think it's valuable to reiterate, because I know that the public may focus on the revenue collected, but where these cameras were placed, a 200% increase in compliance with speed, 72% decrease in high-end speeders. I know I'm not alone around this table on this. Speeding and dangerous driving is the issue brought to my attention most often. A ton of staff time is dedicated to investigating these serious concerns, responding to and meeting with residents on this, and there's a cost to that too. And temporary traffic calming can only go so far. And I know how frustrated residents feel when we encourage them to report, incidences of speeding and dangerous driving to the police. So I think this is definitely the direction that the city needs to go, based on data in areas of need. Another question, we've talked about this before, Krista, I've talked to your team, but in my ward, I have a camera on Innes Road, which is a major arterial, and it's adjacent to a high school. There's high speeds on Innes, to be sure, but there's been some feedback from the community that the camera might be better placed on Provence, the adjacent road, where there's more pedestrian traffic. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to, in your perspective, is this camera in the right location?
Thank you, through you, Chair. We did do a review of location of all of the school locations. In some instances, we looked at the road directly in front of the school, or if it was on a corner, both roads adjacent to the school. We evaluated each location individually and then ranked them based on the risk factors that we had previously talked about. So compliance was low, and there was a high level of traffic traveling at 15 kilometers an hour or more over the posted speed limit at that location. And so that's why Innes Road was selected.
Okay, thank you. And I think it's good to point out that we're going to keep reviewing these locations into the next year as well. So moving away from ASC to the school bus stop arm pilot, thank you for reporting back. I had provided that direction in the spring, and I can appreciate with the interruptions to the school year last year that we need to extend the pilot. My hope is that we can expand this project in the future as well. But I'm wondering, what can we do in the meantime to try and address this issue as we continue to collect data? Because I was spurred to inquire about this, following really disturbing reports and pictures and videos that were sent to me of school buses being passed in my community. And I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to prevent that. So is there anything we can do as we continue to collect data for the pilot?
Thank you, through you, Chair. We did provide some information to councillors in the back to school period in September. Communications materials to roll out related to school bus camera violations and the need for residents to stop when a school bus has their stop arm extended. We'll continue to provide educational materials as needed on that specific issue, as well as other school zone safety communications as we go forward. The Road Safety Action Plan has a strategic communications plan that has been developed. And so we looked at when certain types of collisions are occurring throughout the year and developed our communication strategy around that. So certain times of the year we'll communicate on different topics. We're coming up into December. The focus will move towards impaired driving due to the holiday season. Back to school time is a time we typically speak about school zone safety and school bus camera violations. So we will continue to roll out those types of communications initiatives through the Road Safety Action Plan and the communication strategy developed under that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll look forward to continuing to work with your team on that and with our local school bus providers. So that's it for my questions. I just want to say, I'm wholly supportive of this motion by Councillor Deans, and I do appreciate the question from Councillor Dudas about the amendment, because I did have the same one. So thank you very much, Chair.
Great, and I'll just point out that's Catherine's camera that is giving her that super bright purple hair, but it looks pretty groovy. Anyway, Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I don't have purple hair to show you today, but I agree. I like Catherine's. The questions I have, Phil, for you on this are, do we know how many tickets issued, or Krista, sorry, how many tickets were issued for 15 kilometers over the speed limit or less? Because we're hearing today about, stunt driving and road racing and all that. But I know the street where I have a camera located, I've never had complaints about either one of those things. It's more the tickets I'm hearing about are, 10, as the chair said earlier, 10, 12 kilometers over. So do we know how many fit in each of those categories?
In terms of the numbers, we can find out we do get the data, and the Joint Process Center does set us data in terms of how many tickets have been issued for each location. In terms of the number, we can follow up with them and find out if we can get that exact number. Like was mentioned earlier in the presentation, we don't know the exact number in terms of the threshold as to when a ticket gets issued or not. I believe, if you're going 3 kilometers over the speed limit, you probably won't get a ticket, but I'm not sure where that threshold is in terms of where that's at. But we can follow up with you if you want. In terms of, we'll follow up with the Joint Processing Center to see, how many were above 15 and below 15.
That's all I want to know, Phil. Over and under 15, please.
I would expect that we could get that. We'll follow up with you in the next couple of days.
Okay, and with respect to Councillor Dean's motion to expand the photo radar program beyond school zones, will there be public consultation done on this?
The locations will be selectively based on the data. So in terms of public consultation, we can let folks know, like we did during the pilot, and what we'll do. The plan would be once we evaluate all the data. For the locations that we're going to put in 2023, we would send a memo to council, but we wouldn't be looking for input from residents to say, well, do you want a camera here, you want a camera there, because basically we're going to put the cameras where the data supports it.
Sorry, Phil, I'm not alluding to locations of cameras. I'm talking about expanding the program. Like, I think we have widespread support in the city to put it into school zones. It was a easy decision for all of us to make. Everybody wants to have safer school zones. I think as one of the locations that have a camera, I'll share with my colleagues that one of the issues was during COVID, when the schools were closed, people were saying, well, why is that camera still there? Because they thought, in some parts of the city, the school zones go back up to 50 when school's not in, but that's done through signage and everything. And in my location, it stayed at 40. So I think in the first report on revenue, the location in my area was the highest source of tickets in the whole city for this. And so I'm just wondering about that. I think we need to tell the public what we're doing and not just have a motion walked on to this committee today without the public aware of what we're doing. So will there be some sort of consultation before we expand this program beyond the parameters that we told the public we were doing, which was school zones only?
Well, through you, Chair, this is what we have the report today. I mean, what we're recommending is we continue with the school zones. We also add parks because we know that kids and young adults go to parks to do different activities, and they're walking next to the street. So we're going to develop a criteria. This will be data driven again, and so that's what we're going to move forward if this report gets approved. And similarly, if Councillor Dean's motion gets approved, we'll also be looking to pilot on roads where there's excessive speeds because of racing, and also looking at areas where there's high speeds with a lot of vulnerable road users, as per the amendment from Councillor Menard. So this is the venue in terms of letting the public know that that we're going to be expanding the program to other things other than schools. We will have a comprehensive education and communications plan that will provide that information when we roll these out in 2023. And every location will have a sign like we have today that says there's a camera in use. Like Councillor Chair Tierney mentioned earlier, we don't hide these cameras. We put the signs out, we let folks know. And so it shouldn't be a surprise if folks are speeding that they get a ticket at these locations.
Agreed, Phil. And, we've had discussions about that. Okay, then maybe through the chair, I will ask Councillor Deans if it would be a friendly amendment to add some form of public consultation to your motion before we actually approve it, or do you just want to slide this through today? I'm hoping, sorry to phrase it to you that way, but I'm really hoping you'll realize that we should allow the public to know what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I'm looking to Phil to give us some guidance here, if it would be possible to add some public consultation. I mean, as I said when I spoke, and I think as Phil has reiterated, like, we're not trying to slide any through the public. The public, by and large, support the initiative. They certainly support it where they're vulnerable road users and children, and there seems to be broader support for other initiatives. And I said when I spoke, like, I agree that if we were to put these cameras broadly across the city, especially in areas where we've artificially reduced the speed, that's just not fair. But there are some areas in the city, and I think we all have some, where our roadways are being used as speedways, and people are out there racing on them because they're wide and they're straight and they're available. So it's that sort of thing where we protect the public that are at high risk of injury because of behaviors on our roadway that we're looking to address. I'm not opposed to public consultation if there's a mechanism that Phil can see through this. What this is what I've asked for is 2 locations to pilot it and then come back and tell us what makes sense. Does it make sense to continue that? Does it make sense to expand that? Does it make sense to end that? So I don't know if we normally do public consultation.
Yeah, so Councillor Deans, before this rises to council, I'll give direction to staff. Maybe we can work together on what that wording would look like before it actually gets to council, if Councillor Hubley is amenable to that.
Well, maybe if I could just finish, Councillor Tierney, I'd like to hear from Phil if it is a normal practice to do public consultation when we're piloting something new, or if we pilot it and then if we make a decision to expand it, that's when we do the consultation. So maybe Phil could answer that question first.
I think it depends on the subject that's being piloted. I mean, in this case where it's based on data where we have safety issues, as you mentioned, we will be coming back to committee. The schools and the parks are things that we're recommending to be implemented moving forward. But this motion that you brought forward is a pilot. We will be coming back to committee in 2024 after we've had a year and a half worth of data to see if it's effective. If it's effective, or if it's not, we'll see what the data shows us. And I would expect that in 2024, it would be an opportunity, to either decide, as council decide, do you want to move forward with including this in the program or not including it. So I would expect that would be the time in terms of the final decision. So this motion that you brought forward doesn't mean that it's going to be we're going to do this type of thing for these type of roads forever. It's basically a 1.5 to 2 year pilot, and then we'll come back to committee. And if council at the time decides to move forward with the making permanent, then we would have that discussion at that point.
Okay,
I'm in the hands of council in terms of consultation. In terms of, I just worry about the selection of locations and not being based on data, because ultimately, that's our focus. This is all data driven, and I think based on the surveys that we've heard from people, they're accepting of that. We don't want to get in a situation where we start getting asked, well, we really should do it here, or should do it there. It's got to be based on data, because ultimately we want to make our roads safer.
Right, and that's what I said in the motion. So Phil, what you're saying is we should pilot 2 locations, and then when you report back in 2024, if you have found it to be successful and are recommending an expansion, we would do public consultation at that point.
Yeah, and I would expect as part of this pilot, similar to what we did for this pilot over the last 1.5 years, is that we'll do another survey. I would expect probably in the spring of 2024, to first find out, how effective the program's been and the feedback, but also specifically ask questions about the locations where we've installed these cameras for this pilot, to get people's feedback similar to what we did over the last year.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, based on Phil's answers, I wouldn't think it appropriate to do the public consultation now, so wouldn't accept the amendment as friendly.
Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable with the amendment saying that the public consultation is done before we implement this citywide. Like, to take your point, Councillor Deans, do your pilot project first and then get your results and then do it. I just want the public to be aware and participating in the decision to expand the program, because I can tell you that I hear a lot from seniors on fixed income who went through that zone at 52 kilometers an hour and got a ticket. And as they expand the program and more of you get cameras, you're going to get those messages. And it's heartfelt, because some of these people don't have the extra money. So, whether their speedometer needs to be calibrated or whatever, what I often tell people is pick another route if you're getting these tickets more than once, because clearly there's something not working right here. On the lighter side, I will tell you that I also got a letter from somebody that got 5 tickets, and they were very mad at me for not calling them after the first ticket to let them know that they were getting tickets. So be ready for that kind of messaging as well. So are we at the same place here, Councillor Deans? We'll just add in community consultation before implementation after the pilot. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I think Phil's saying that we would do that. So that wording, we'll have to work on the wording, maybe we can bring it to council, but I think that wording, what it does is suggest that we've already predetermined we're going to go ahead with the expansion of it, and we haven't. I think the wording would have to say, in the event there's a recommendation in 2024 to expand it, that there would be a public consultation process.
Let's take advantage of this time where both of us are on the same page and agree. So I'll support your motion to go to council with the understanding that work will be done on getting some sort of wording in there on that. Okay, thank you.
Great. I like to see that come together. And it's funny because a lot of the things we do, and I don't see any other speakers, we're very NIMBY. We're actually the opposite on this one. We're IMBY. Everybody wants one of these cameras in their ward for some reason. So I think the success of the program speaks for itself. I do want to thank Phil and Christia for all the great work on this. So I'm not going to waste anyone more time. We have so by way of order on the Vice Leaper's amending motion of the wording. Is that item carried?
Carried.
On the Dean's Menard motion, is that item carried?
Carried.
And
as
on
amended, Chair, as motion as amended.
As amended.
No, it hasn't been amended yet.
It will be
amended.
The wording will get corrected by council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alan, thanks.
Yep.
And so on that motion, is it carried? And as Alan mentions, it will get wordsmithed before we get to council. Is that carried?
Carried.
Terrific. And so I'm just going to skip down to, we have some inquiries, and I'll go first to Vice Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, an inquiry. People walking, using bicycles and other mobility devices often have their passage on sidewalks, multi-use paths, and bike lanes endangered or blocked by construction or service vehicles. These can either be long-term or of short duration and associated with development, civil works, or maintenance activities. What rules, guidelines, and policies are in place to prioritize direct, accessible, and safe passage by vulnerable road users of all ages, protected from vehicular traffic when these activities take place? And how are those enforced? What challenges to the enforcement of traffic control plans does the city experience?
Terrific, thank you very much. We have inquiry from Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize, it's a little bit long, but I'll read it out. Residents of Ward 19 continue to request speed limit reductions as a means to reduce operating speeds, and many requests reference council reports to committee. Many of these reports are to implement a speed limit reduction that is not supported by the speed zoning policy for urban and rural roads approved by council in 2009 and not supported by staff. Can staff review locations that were brought to committee and council from this term of council and the previous term of council where speed limits have been reduced by council reports and report back to committee on the effectiveness of speed limit reductions versus the operating speed 85th percentile? Primarily, what was the pre to post change in the 85th percentile speed once the lowered speed limit was established? And the speeding zoning policy for urban and rural roads notes the below. Following completion of a speed zone review and provided changes to the posted speed limit are found to be warranted, an assessment of vehicle speeds will be undertaken to confirm if, once instituted, drivers are observing the new limit. Spot speed surveys will be conducted on collector and arterial roadways 1 year after change has been implemented to ensure there is a high level of compliance and to verify the variation in driving speeds has not increased to a level that could increase collision potential. There are 3 results following such a review. 1, no change in the posted speed limit. 2, reduce the speed limit. Or 3, increase the speed limit. The lowering of a posted speed limit to a level other than what is recommended or warranted by a speed zone review is most often requested by a resident firm in the belief any reduction in the speed limit will automatically lead to a reduction in the speed of all traffic, ultimately improving safety to all road users. However, an alteration to a traffic regulation, no matter how passionately the argument is presented, does not simply affect the individual requesting the change, but rather impacts thousands upon thousands of road users, whether they are motorists, pedestrians, or cyclists, thereby creating a significant financial strain on police resources required to enforce a speed limit that is not respected. Consequently, should there be no substantive reduction in the average and 85th percentile speed of traffic on given roadways, the previously posted and appropriate speed limit will be reinstated. Are staff following this policy direction to review speed limits 1 year after a change has been made? And if so, how many times has a speed limit been altered, reinstated? Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. And we had 2 more come in. I hope they're prepped there, Kel, from Councillor Fleury.
Yes, I did confirm. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, could you put the road cut one first, if you wouldn't mind?
Do you have a copy of it in front of you, Councillor Fleury? You might want to go ahead and start reading it. They're both kind of lengthy.
My screen froze. It'll take a second.
Terrific.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I have it in front of me if you, while we wait, if that's
Yeah,
easier.
please proceed. That's terrific. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'll start with the line tarring, which so the subject is asphalt crack sealing. Infrastructure preservation and reduction of infrastructure degradation has been on the mind of Transportation Committee members recently. We want all road users to be able to use the roads network safely. Asphalt crack sealing mitigates tripping hazards and water collection in the right-of-way, which allows for a safer experience while preserving the roadway. The city spends yearly around $10 million in roadway asphalting. The city promotes the amount of potholes it fixes at the beginning of each spring and throughout the year. For example, this tweet from February 24, 2020 shows the city promoting the 1,167 potholes filled in the previous week. International research has been undertaken and methods and approaches to improve asphalt repair and preservation. For example, here's the research from the University of Minnesota, Duluth. There have also been research done in Canada. For example, here's a thesis from the University of Waterloo. As roadway infrastructure continues to age, climate change continues to contribute to serious degradation impacts on these cities' infrastructure. And as City Council continues to increase the funding for roadway resurfacing, we need to improve our asphalt crack sealing practices. 1, which department of the city leads the roadway crack sealing efforts? 2, as per the city's promotion of pothole fixing, number of pothole fixed in a week, and the total dollars spent on this annually, we see that roads repairs are important. How many meters of city streets have been sealed yearly over the last 5 years? And 3, what is the yearly financial investment by the city to seal roads, asphalt cracks? So that's the first one, Mr. Chair. And I'll just, I see it on the screen.
Yeah, and I know Karina, it's in her department. She'll get back to you on what gets tarred and stuff like that. So if you can read the second one.
Yes. I do have a picture for that one, which I think helps the visual. Let me just pull it up here. So when the city issues a utility company a road cut permit, the expectation is that the road's previous condition will be reinstated adequately and not degraded. However, work such as the recent work that took place on Rideau Street near Charlotte by TELUS, the road was cut in a trench, work was completed, and the road was minimally reinstated, rather negatively impacting our recent investment along Rideau Street. Infrastructure preservation and reduction of infrastructure degradation has been on the mind of our committee recently. In 2021, the city spent $41.2 million on asphalt surfacing on its streets. As road cut permits are issued and completed, there seems to be a pattern of degradation of city infrastructure by utility companies, it should read. What does the city do to, 1, how are communities and councillors' offices informed of planned work from utility companies when the cut involves a major section of a main street such as Rideau Street, bus routes, and those within BIA catchments? And what can a community or councillor office require from this engagement? 2, what is the city standard for resurfacing roads and sidewalks after a road cut from a utility work? 3, what standards are in place to ensure this work does not create a degradation to city infrastructure? 3, why does the city accept trench cut reinstatements? The trench approach seems to be prioritized by utility company as a technique to minimize equipment use, but which has most impact on degrading our infrastructure. 5, what are the clear criteria as to when staff will require a broader resurfacing in the context of the utility development? 6, what does the city do to ensure that the infrastructure is placed and is previous or better condition? 7, does the city review the condition after utility company has completed its work? And if it is not properly done, what are the consequences to the company? 8, if the work is subpar, does the city request the utility company fix their work? And 9, does the city have the plans to ensure that moving forward, utility companies don't degrade our city infrastructure and that the reinstatement meets the residents and city expectation for its own infrastructure?
Great, thank you for that. That completes our agenda today. We have no other business, so we'll be adjourning. Next meeting will take place Wednesday, November 1st, 2021. And thank you, committee members, for your patience and valuable questions today. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. Have a good afternoon, all.